how significant is the role of Alexandroupolis in times of turmoil? That's quite a narrow topic. I'm happy for you to widen that out, talk a bit more about a general US policy in the energy area for Southeast Europe. So please take it away.
Sure. Well, let me do exactly that. Start big and then drill down to the Alexandroupoli project, which is just incredibly important, and huge congratulations to everybody in Prime Minister Mitsotakis' government who's been part of this going back to my time in Athens, but also to Gas Trade and Kostis and everybody else who's worked to bring this to reality. First point I would make, and I always say this to audiences here in Washington as well, I, of course, was living in the European Union in Greece in the winter of 2022 when the war in Ukraine began and we saw the weaponization of Russia's energy resources. I remember the profound anxiety that I heard from Energy Minister Skrekis, but also from companies who saw skyrocketing bills for their energy inputs and consumers who were facing a sharp spike in the price that they were paying for utilities. I think Europe has been remarkably successful over the past 2.5 years in decoupling from Russia's energy and demonstrating to Putin that his effort to weaponize his energy resources will be unsuccessful. It was quite striking to me when President von der Leyen gave her first speech before the European Parliament after her re-election, where she talked about how Europe had suffered the effects of Russia's energy coercion in 2021 and 2022 and would never go down that road again, and the emphatic welcome that that message received from the members of the European Parliament. This has been a very important transatlantic partnership in achieving this goal. 70% of America's LNG exports in the months after the start of the war went to Europe and European markets. So American LNG producers played a huge role in helping Europe to navigate away from this dependency and vulnerability to Russian energy coercion. I think it's clear now that Russia will never again be seen as a reliable energy supplier. Europe and the European Union writ large is committed to full decoupling from Russian energy by 2027. This is harder for some governments than it is for others, but what's most striking to me is the determination to reach that goal. That means no Russian pipeline gas, no Russian LNG, no Russian crude oil, no Russian coal. Here in the United States as well, our Congress has appropriated billions of dollars to help facilitate our decoupling from Russian nuclear fuel supply, which was the one aspect of Russian energy that the United States had grown too dependent upon. So we're all working towards this goal together, and it's a great transatlantic success story, but most importantly, it's a success for European consumers and European governments, including the government of Greece that has played such a leadership role. Let me just talk for a second, and then I'll let you fire some other questions at me about Alexandroupoli. I'm incredibly proud of the work that happened on my watch, and Ambassador Sunis and the embassy team have sustained to build support for the Alexandroupoli FSRU. It is a truly strategic project. It was so striking to me. One of the last things I did as ambassador in May of 2022 was the inauguration of the works at Alexandroupoli that was hosted by Prime Minister Mitsotakis, but with President Michel, with Vučić, with Bulgarian President and the North Macedonian Prime Minister. It was clearly a regional project, and it has been from the beginning. But what's really interesting to me is how the scope of that regional engagement has now expanded. The United States is all in on the vision that the Greek government has elaborated of a vertical corridor, which would go from Alexandroupoli up north through Bulgaria, Romania, into Ukraine. Just yesterday, I was talking with the American LNG company Venture Global. Venture Global is working with DTEC of Ukraine and has been working to identify cargoes of gas that can go from the United States through Alexandroupoli north as far as Ukraine. That's a vision that the United States wants to support, and it's a vision that is consistent with the role that Prime Minister Mitsotakis and his government has sketched out of developing Greece as an energy hub and an energy power for all of Southeastern Europe.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for those words. You have underlined, and I think it was a striking development in Europe. You've underlined the speed with which Europe adjusted in the wake of Russia's attack on Ukraine and the disruption of energy supplies. And it has been truly impressive, and I think many people have seen it as an example of the possibility for swift action by the European partners when circumstances require it. But didn't it come a little bit late? I mean, couldn't Europe have made a more strategic move away from, or to diversify its oil supplies earlier than this? Were the signs there back in 2014 and even before that Russia wasn't a trustworthy partner when it came to energy security?
Absolutely. And I was part of those conversations with our European allies after the invasion of Crimea, starting in 2014, really counseling against deepening dependence on Russian energy. That's why we're so skeptical about Nord Stream 2. It's, of course, a tragedy that it took this brutal invasion, the war, the hundreds of thousands of lives turned upside down in order to create that level of clarity in Europe. But what I would emphasize is our shared vision going forward and the absolute resolution that I see among European leaders. There's going to be a new EU Commission, of course, but what's striking to me, and I've traveled in a lot of Europe in this job. I look forward to being back in Greece, by the way, in a couple of weeks in October. But I have found absolute unanimity of perspective among Europeans on the importance of now pursuing what the United States has supported for many decades, which is the diversification of sources and routes for energy, combined with the other aspect of this story over the past couple of years has been the dramatic acceleration of Europe's energy transition away from fossil fuels towards renewables. And of course, in many ways, the European champion of that effort has been the Hellenic Republic and the remarkable progress that Greece has made in the decarbonization of its economy and the accelerated deployment of wind and solar. That also means, by the way, that we can't just be talking about pipelines and FSRUs. We also need to be talking about power interconnectors and cables. It's why the United States has been so supportive of the work that Greece has been doing, for instance, with the Gregi interconnector with Egypt. In fact, I was with an Egyptian delegation and the Deputy Foreign Minister of Egypt just yesterday, talking about our strong support for this vision of power interconnections from Greece, north to Cyprus, to the Greek mainland, and then onwards to the European continent. Similarly, very, very supportive of the Great Sea Interconnector and the vision of connecting Cyprus to Greece, and eventually perhaps Cyprus to Israel, building out an architecture of power connectivity across the Eastern Mediterranean, focused on renewable, clean power.
We see, and you've talked about, and we've discussed today, some of the detail of all of that system of interconnection that needs to take place for many of these energy solutions to work, including the vertical corridor. And of course, bolting cables and pipelines together is one thing. Getting national governments to coordinate on allowing these projects to go ahead is another one. This is a difficult question, I guess, for a former ambassador to answer, but where do you see the political bottlenecks along this pipeline? And how should Europe go about trying to resolve them?
So we face exactly the same thing here in the United States. We're rapidly accelerating our deployment of clean power in the American West, where I'm from, California, huge consumption center for clean power. A lot of that power is going to be generated in Western states like Idaho, Arizona. So we need to build massive transmission. Constructing those projects crosses different constituencies, different regulatory authorities. Europe faces exactly the same, and all the difficulties of our federal system are mirrored in the sovereignties of the EU member states. What's most interesting to me, first of all, Alistair, is positive knock-on effect that comes from these cooperation projects. I should have mentioned as well, aside from our tremendous support for Alexandroupoli, for the IGB pipeline with Bulgaria, and all that represents in terms of cooperation between these two large EU member states. But I would be remiss if I didn't also underline our very strong support for the Greece-North Macedonia pipeline and the possibility that that project has to deliver more affordable, more reliable power for citizens in Skopje, and the multiplier effect that that will have in terms of reinforcing what the two governments achieved through PRESPA and the larger normalization of ties between Greece and North Macedonia. But it delivers practical benefits for citizens, because I remember having lived through the tremendous debates over the PRESPA's agreement, and there in Thessaloniki in 2018, all of the demonstrations against PRESPA's. But the practical cooperation, the practical benefits for citizens are what I would emphasize. And it's things like reliable, affordable power and heat for citizens in Skopje and in North Macedonia writ large, coming out of projects like that pipeline, that I think are the great benefit of these kinds of projects. I think you asked sort of what's the impediment? Of course, in every context, there's always somebody who has economic advantage from the way things are. I mentioned earlier the Great Sea Interconnector. This is a no-brainer from a price and benefit standpoint vis-a-vis consumers in Cyprus, but it's going to cost some upfront money to capitalize the investment in that interconnector, and it will disadvantage those who have made money off of Cyprus's existing status as an energy island. So you've got to go after those constituencies. And the same thing applies in almost every context. Again, we face exactly the same thing here in the United States. We have this dramatic acceleration of energy transition here in the United States. We are rapidly lowering the carbon intensity of our economy, even as we're growing that economy. But what does that mean for the coal workers who have been part of the historic energy economy in the central United States? What does that mean for workers who have to be retrained in order to take skills that, for instance, in the past were focused on fossil energy, in order to deliver the technical skills that we need to manage a vastly increased flow of electric power and the deployment of clean energy systems like wind turbines and solar cells and battery storage systems. So this is all about political leadership. And here, too, I would really applaud Prime Minister Mitsotakis, the vision that he has elaborated, but also the whole team at the Greek Ministry of Energy. I am just so appreciative of the leadership and the vision that Minister Skylakakis, Minister Skrekis before him, Alexandros Sidoukou, who has been leading this charge long before it was fashionable in terms of accelerating the energy transition, but also the work that's being done, I know, at the state level in Greece. I've talked with Governor Gisicostas on many occasions about the vision that he has laid out, what he's trying to see happen both in Western Macedonia, but also the offshore wind projects that are happening there in the Thracian Gulf.
All of those government ministers have been with us today, so they would be. I'll make sure that your gratitude is passed on to them, or you can pass it on yourself when you meet them in a couple of weeks. Geoffrey, thank you very much for your time and your expertise. It's incomparable, irreplaceable for us. I know that you need to move on at some point fairly soon. So if you do need to leave while I bring our other guests up onto the stage, please feel free. We don't need you to hang around all afternoon.
Okay, great. I'll hang around for a little bit. It's great to see everybody. I was looking over the program. The Economist, as usual, has done a tremendous job of bringing in all the key players in this sector. So I will listen for at least a little bit.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Key players, including yourself, of course.